We are recording to the cloud. Okay, good afternoon or good morning, everyone, or good evening if you are somewhere else in the world other than Chicago or the Bay Area. Hi, everybody. I'm Al Iverson. I am a product manager for deliverability stuff here at Kickbox, and today we kick off another one of our fun webinars where we're going to talk about the balance between deliverability goals and revenue goals from increased sending, and what can go wrong. How do you sort of balance those to make sure you do things right from a deliverability perspective while still maximizing the revenue you can get from emails? Today, along with me, like I said, I'm the guy from Kickbox. I also have the guy from Epsilon on the phone on the webinar with us today, John Stephenson. John, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of had it with Deliverability Guy, but I've been doing this about 20 years, so overseen it over a number of different, 3 different ESPs, 5 or 6 different email platforms, which always gives you kind of a more enhanced view of what's going on. So my other claim to fame, which also applies to Al, I think he's been in it longer than I am, but I preceded Gmail to the game. So we've been around when Gmail didn't exist. So hopefully that is built up enough street cred for the first few minutes here to keep you engaged. But yeah, happy to be talking with you all today.
I love it. You remember they announced it on April 1st. They were like, is this a joke or real?
Yeah, and they had a history of doing jokes on April 1st. So it was, yeah, I did forget
that. As I said, I work for Kickbox. Here's a 3-second message from our sponsor. If you want to talk deliverability tools or you need help with email verification to improve deliverability by minimizing the chances of getting garbage in your email data, we can help. Feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to connect you with the right people or talk to you myself. John, you want to do the same here for Epsilon?
Absolutely. We're Epsilon is a multi-channel data company. We kind of try to hit all of your marketing needs and marketing and other types of communication. So if that applies to any of you, feel free to reach out to us as well.
Thank you, sir. So here's what we're going to cover today. And this slide is almost more for us than for you. We're running through all of this cool stuff, and you can wonder what that really weird looking sausage hot dog thing is going on there. We actually have a new design resource that makes these really cool, kind of silly webinar graphics for us. So if you're wondering, do we kind of go all out making them look silly? Yeah, that's unfortunately or fortunately, that's on purpose. So enjoy the silly graphics, and hopefully the guidance will be useful along the way as well. What we want to talk about today is basically starting from how much is too much. We all deal with email marketing. That's sort of what we're doing to help people. At the end of the day, it's email marketing that pays the bills. And whenever we talk about the ROI of email marketing, we're talking about the revenue made from those email messages. But it's important to remember that email is more than just broadcasting to people to get them to spend money. Email ultimately drives two-way relationships to the point that ISPs and mailbox providers look at engagement as one of the strong signals to decide whether or not somebody's a good sender or a bad sender, meaning at the end of the day, that engagement, that sending wanted mail, wanted content, stuff that subscribers actually want to receive, is a necessity to have deliverability success. And that can be kind of a challenge sometimes, right? Where it's, your boss or a client or a customer wants to hit the button to send again, because every time they hit the button, they make another X number of dollars. But the flip side of that is the more you send, the more you have the potential to dilute that engagement, to reduce the interest from subscribers. And that eventually gets to a point where it can impede the ability to get delivered to the inbox successfully. So that's what we're all talking about today, is how do we manage this stuff. And we'll talk about, what's the right way to test your way through it and decide what the best cadence is and how often you should email people. If you were hoping for harder numbers, you might be annoyed at us because a lot of our answers are going to say test, test, test. John's going to have some good advice about different ways to test it here too in just a second. But ultimately, at the end of the day, yeah, it is all about testing and finding the sweet spot specific to you or your industry. And that's because it's going to vary based on that vertical, based on the industry. What you're looking for here is, we can say in the second bullet point, watch or measure for engagement. And what I mean by that is watch for a drop off and engagement, and make sure you're doing it and testing it over time, measuring it over time, because you don't want to assume that that short-term success is going to be the same success you get from doing the same thing every day forever. It can be, there's no harm in including other stuff in the test matrix, and personalization and other factors are still good things to test out. But the key here is test to figure out where engagement starts to soften and drop off.
And I did want to add one thing on that short-term success. I kind of noted to myself, and if you've heard the marketing lore about the Pepsi challenge, right? So in the, maybe dating myself, but in the 80s, there were a cola wars going on, which we all lived through. And it was Coke versus Pepsi, and Pepsi was trying to gain market share. So they had this gimmick where they do a taste test. Hey, here's do you like cup A or cup B? And a lot of people kept picking Pepsi, and that's what then prompted Coke to make New Coke. Now, the after the fact takeaway was, well, you know what? Pepsi is sweeter, and people, when you have one small sip, one cup, you would prefer it to be sweet. Coke's not quite as sweet, but after you drink maybe a whole Pepsi, that may be too sweet for a lot of people. So that kind of gamed the end results, where a short-term gain was kind of resulted in kind of a long-term loss, or what the value wasn't there in the long term as much. And I think that's the same with email. One of its enemies is it works too damn well. So it's a free money machine, and so then you're just going to be tapping it all day. And that obviously there is an economies of scale where that just kind of doesn't pan out, or inefficiency of the results. So we'll kind of be talking about how to try to balance those and how to measure that. As well.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you, sir. Awkward pause there for a second. As we were talking before the webinar started, we really should have subtitled this "A Series of Awkward Pauses" as we go through and find our way through. Kind of intentionally did not over prepare for this. We put a lot of good information together, but wanted to keep it fresh and actually have a discussion and not just sort of be reading the bullet points. And so it leads once in a while to something like this, where basically we've kind of just already said everything that's on the slide here. But it's important to remember, right? Ultimately, deliverability is engagement driven. There's a whole bunch of factors, right? Deliverability can be a black box. The spam filtering at Gmail certainly is a black box with hundreds, thousands, millions of data points all going into it that help drive that decision engine to tell you if you're going to get to the inbox or not. But if you, this is what I tell clients every day, if you hand me a cocktail napkin, you say you have to write down the one thing that's going to maximize deliverability. What makes or breaks deliverability? What is that one bullet point you can put on there? And that's engagement.
Yeah, agreed. I would also put that same bullet point.
And so the natural extension, the second question there, is what about MPP, Apple's mail privacy protection? Hey, I heard it blew everything up. Opens are junky, opens are garbage. Even some of the ISP people we talk to, they say opens are bots talking to bots. They're not real people. They don't tell you anything. And that's sort of a yes but or true but statement, right? There's nuance to this. And yes, in this age of Apple mail privacy protection, there are real limitations with what you can do with open tracking. And I would really be concerned about using open tracking as the sole decision for an A/B path or something like that for a specific decision tree for an individual subscriber. And as John put here, some of them are these are basically Schrodinger's opens, right? You don't know exactly what's going on behind there. But when it comes to having to segment based on a deliverability problem, if you're looking to temporarily suppress unengaged subscribers, MPP is good enough. The bucket isn't perfect. It is not where we were before all of this stuff happened a year and a half ago or whatever it was that MPP dropped. It was the year before last, maybe. Actually, no, that I think about it. And so, yeah, it's imperfect. The bucket is not 100% accurate. It's going to have too much stuff in it. Some of those things are not going to be opens, but it's the best we've got. And so when it comes to broad segmentation strokes based on engagement, you still want to do that based on opens.
Yeah, and I think with when you're looking at campaign performance, I think most marketers are looking at, how'd this campaign do? How'd that campaign do? And it's up and down. I think when you look at deliverability, more often I'm looking at a trend. I'm looking at, is this dropping, significantly? Strange things can happen on the day, but is this, if you have a repetition-driven problem, you're going to see usually it's going to kind of keep tearing down or keep coming back repeatedly. So, when I'm looking at that, if there is a consistent level of bots, that's okay. Now knowing what Apple MPP provides, certainly that transition period was no fun. But if you're kind of cruising at the same altitude, now it's different. As Keith called out, the message needs to be in the inbox for Apple to pull that content, which is what fires your pixel. That's what you count as an open. So seeing that from a deliverability perspective, that really does tell you what is happening. And if you have enough volume, of course, also look at clicks. But I do think, if there's other bot activity that's more sporadic or more overwhelming, certainly I'm sure, work with your ESP on that. We've certainly seen some strange bot activity that affects a few different things. So sporadic, erratic activity is certainly scary, but, kind of a known quantity that's stable is something you can better deal with, at least from the deliverability perspective. I'm sure your campaign measurement throws it off, but we just want to see, is it going into the inbox? I would also say each ESP that you might be working with may deal with Apple MPP differently. So from our side, we said, we're going to put that in a different category. We're going to exclude that from what we call an open. So Apple MPP kind of go in a bucket, and you can look at that and look at that as well and compare that to, okay, what is, how do I piece this all together? We've said, hey, let's just look at genuine opens, and you can add back in that other quantity. Other ESPs may separate them, they may not separate them. If you've seen your opens go up about 100% or more, then you probably have included Apple MPP opens. If you've seen them go down 40%, that probably means that they're excluding them. So that's something to keep, should have that understanding. But there's a lot of different ways a lot of different data skews out there. I think deliverability geeks are used to looking into that stuff. But again, if it's consistent, that is much preferred from something that's occasionally kind of like a gremlin going in and changing things all of a sudden, and you don't know what's going on. So in that way, Apple MPP is something we can deal with.
Yeah, and a couple of things. But first, another one of those awkward pauses, as my small dog Murray demands that I open the door by 2 inches so that he can go through it, walk around in a circle, and come back in. But you raised a good point, though, too, as well, talking about specifically having enough data, having enough send volume sort of implied there. And it's interesting, my colleague Jennifer Nespola-Lance and I, we do a lot of the consulting engagements here for Kickbox, and occasionally we have to turn away a client because they don't have enough volume. So there's this weird thing in deliverability where the more volume you have, sort of the greater lever you have to measure what's going on and segment to help address and improve what's going on. So when you're trying to keep in mind some of the lessons from this and the testing, this is really oriented toward people who have a list and have a brand. If you're a brand new, one person email real estate agent, and you deal with maybe 200 email messages a month, it's going to be a lot trickier, right? The numbers are a lot smaller. The percentages get wonky. You don't have the same level of insight as you do. So when we talk about a lot of this stuff, yeah, it is very much sort of brand marketer focused. And that's a necessity to get to that volume level where you can sort of trust what this data potentially tells you with the percentages. Watching for subscriber addresses going inactive. And that's a tough thing to do. It's difficult to let go, to want to suppress an address, because there still could be, in theory, a live person on the other side of that mailbox, on the other side of that send. But you have to remember that that's not always the case. I don't know what the email churn numbers are. Nowadays, they used to say 30% of addresses churn every year. I don't know if that's still the case. You see Gmail is the big dog and everybody seems to love Gmail. Maybe most B2C is, 60+% in Gmail. But you also see that, surprisingly, Yahoo, for example, is growing, not shrinking. So certainly There are people that are moving mailboxes around in between them. And that means that addresses go dead for a while. After a while, people abandon them either because they get overwhelmed with spam, or they move on because they like the UI of another mailbox provider or another MVP or ISP better. So keep in mind that email marketing should be about the funnel. People come in the funnel on the front end, they're going to fall out the funnel on the back end. Addresses are not going to be forever. And that ties in good to the next thing we'll talk about too, or how that matters as part of the deliverability boosting equation. John, you want to start with these ones?
I do, thank you. So I'll get into kind of my test, right? So we have the magic money button on one end, and then we have some amount of dissatisfaction by on the other end of users getting too much mail. The number one reason a person will unsubscribe, or often mark spam as well, is too much mail. And the reason users will leave, Gmail for Yahoo, they might leave for features, but the number one reason is they abandon their email account because they get too much mail. So we have kind of two different entities that have a bit different, a vested interest, both the receiving network, the mailbox provider, Gmail, Yahoo, Hotmail, and your customers, or possibly former customers, if you annoy them too much, they kind of want you to practice a little bit of restraint. So how do we optimize that? There's no average email. So by that, I mean, you have people on the list that love you and they're going to read everything and they're going to buy. There's some people that had a passing interest. There's, of course, other people that they had a coupon, or they wanted to buy something from their friend's sister's cousin or something, and it was a one-time thing. They have no interest in that product going forward. So maybe the messaging stream and I'll focus more on cadence should be different for those folks, and those folks that kind of start to show no further engagement. So looking at different users and populations and seeing how they interact differently. And what is the long-term value? Now, if you have a product where you're selling something and the person would only buy them once, then maybe that doesn't apply to you. If it's something that people might buy multiple times, then I think consider that lifetime value. Now, I know that all goes out the window in Q4, but the other 3 quarters, maybe you can practice some amount of restraint and retain those guys. Obviously, when it's crunch time, the magic money button is the thing that gets you guys by, then you got to. But I do think there is some amount of restraint to exhibit. That's all what I would say on that one. So here's kind of the usual life cycle, subscriber life cycle management. You onboard them. Maybe there's a welcome series. You send, get into your cadence. And then at some point, I think a lot of people, Alan, I think that the industry is, okay, 1 year, right? And if we were on Mars, well, I don't know how many times Mars goes around the sun, how long its year is, but year is pretty arbitrary. So, your mileage may vary. But, then go to win back attempts after you haven't caught them. So, 360 days a year, that's where it is. And then after that, after the win back, a big juicy offer or something extraordinary, or maybe it's more compelling content to win them back, to say, hey, we're not just asking, we're also giving you valuable information about your hobby, your passion, whatever. And then after that, it's the standing practices. All right, say goodbye. And this is a pretty valid template. It's fairly standard. It's just not as optimized as maybe your audience might be looking for. So I don't know if you had anything to add on that.
No, that's great. I think this is, like you say, this is the starting point. This is very much my default guidance, and there is more strategy you can apply to what you do with people when they reach sort of the end of the line there. And it's all about, what can you do as far as addressing the cadence, or what you send them, or even what volume of those you send at a time. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can do there, but it gets into that next level strategy. And so it starts with, making sure, you're going to lose some people after a while, and eventually you're going to retire some of those addresses after trying different things. Just recognize and respect that, right? Addresses come and addresses go.
All right.
So this is the new VP edition. I like this one. This is Good thing to talk about.
I threw this in. So this is the, you were practicing your strength on the prior slide. And then the new VP comes in and says, run the accounts of everybody that's not unsubscribed and hasn't, addresses that haven't gone dead. And they see this big non-zero list of names and they say, what the hell are you guys doing? And these are the names we can send to. Let's send to all of them tomorrow. Which, if you've done that, you probably experienced that's not a good idea to package up all your least active people that you haven't communicated with a while and then batch them up and send them all at once. So, definitely do not do this. Prior slide is much better. And, maybe throughout this, as Al mentioned, we're kind of focusing on this life cycle and frequency, cadence. There's more, certainly different flavors that this type of testing could take, but, I want to avoid this. And if you know that pretty much eventually you're just going to send to all of them, then don't pretend to be restrained. I know management can kind of make new edicts, but something to consider that if you're going to unleash the hounds, then at least do it in a controlled fashion rather than all at once. It'll really not make for a good Q4, I predict.
20 years ago, because like John alluded to, I'm old. I was working for an e-commerce provider. This is before my exact target days even. And we had an internal system, and then we also used responses to send messages. And we did a test. We were sort of new to this whole deliverability thing and wondering, basically, what can you get away with? What are the boundaries that you need to respect? And so sometimes that involves doing stupid stuff, shooting yourself in somewhere. And we literally picked up every old address in the system that we hadn't mailed to in forever and queued it up with one big mailing with one fantastic offer, started to send that to responses, and about 10% in, it shut off automatically. And my account manager at responses called me and yelled at me. So they catch this kind of stuff, and it lit up their monitoring. Even 20 years ago, before, AOL was probably the only feedback loop back then. That stuff was so barely developed. But responses immediately picked up on it. This was a garbage send and it wasn't going to go well. And they had automation in place to throw out a warning there and say, hey, what's going on here? This is not going to go the way you want. So there's reasons for that. And the reasons for that is you pick up the old data and just send to it without forethought or strategy. You're probably not going to have a happy time.
I've lived that a number of times. So I propose a test. It's kind of a test over a period of time. I would like it to be 1 year. Now, I'm phrasing this on the theoretical because I haven't been able to convince a client to do this yet. I've definitely talked with a lot of deliverability geeks, and a number of them have run this type of test. The one thing I've heard that has been the same, and it fits my life experience, which is if I'm signing up, and I know, as marketers, email geeks, we do look at email differently. So I'm a skewed sample set. But when there's something I'm really interested in, and then they send me way too much email, I'm like frustrated. It's like I don't want to ignore your email, but you're sending me so much that and in fact, you're telling me about the boots, the cool new shoes or whatever in the morning, and then in the afternoon and the evening. And it's like, yeah, I saw it. I'm interested in it, but like, I don't, so now I know. And I think we all, after we get, I don't know, maybe a 1 week or even 3 weeks of email, if we're sending one maybe twice or 3 times a week, often more, you get a feel for what they're doing, right? And if you've had like over Memorial Day or over, Cyber Monday or any of that, then you get a sense for, okay, here are the deals they offer. Oh, and on Monday it's 25% off. On Tuesday it's 30% off. Oh, I'm a sucker unless I buy it. Like I should just wait 2 weeks and we know we'll get that sale. So, people, especially there's savvy shoppers out there that are clocking this stuff, and they get to know what they expect. And if they expect, oh, it's another email, I know they're just gonna talk about the same shoes all week, and then next week it'll be different shoes, but I don't need to pay attention. I actually get more frustrated by that, which my very anecdotal data does fit with other folks that I've spoken with that have run a kind of a frequency test over a long period of time, and noticed that it's the people more prone to purchase that are more likely to hit that unsub button if the frequency just gets too frequent. It just, it's kind of like, this is enough. I don't want to deal with it. I'll just go to your website occasionally, or again, an email geek might write a filter and just have it go to some other folder that they check occasionally. But I think that's, so is your frequency, does it work maybe generally as far as you can tell? And certainly, again, that Pepsi challenge, that first sip tastes great, but do they want to have, 20 ounces of it, a few times a day? Maybe that's too much for them. So I suggest kind of focusing. Now, this is just sort of to get the ideas going, but I said, hey, maybe you want to test different populations. So email-driven recent purchasers. So we know that they're kind of prone to purchase. Now, again, sometimes people just buy it for somebody else as a gift. So maybe you also want to look at email-driven recent repeat purchasers. So those people are actually probably more likely to be of interest, and if they've purchased twice, maybe they're, may keep, this is a true hobby. Obviously, your industry, your specifics will change whether that's the case, how specific a product you're dealing with. But again, you guys make the decision of what these groups are. And then another segment of highly engaged email people and lowly engaged people. So, you kind of get your populations and say, okay, how frequency tolerant is each of these, and what is the ROI of these? And did we run some people off? So that's how I define kind of the populations, or how you should think about the populations to run this test. Then metrics, I mean, there may be other things you can measure depending on how you're, but purchases comes first, clicks comes second. It's, the closest next thing to purchases, then opens. Now, the last two categories are bad. There's kind of not a, I would say, certainly repeated non-engagement is a bad thing. You don't have to have everybody opening every single message, but a lack of engagement over a sustained period of time means that person may be done. Maybe this was their B email address that they kind of give to bulk senders, things like that. And we'll get into other reasons that might be, but and also unsubscribes and complaints. Again, some people do use the complaint button as an unsubscribe, and this goes back to when, again, 20 years ago, when people were told, oh, if you click on anything, then that's how they know you're active. So a lot of people, that is the habit they've formed. Sometimes complaint is just a different unsub button, but you should mostly view those separately. But there are people saying, I want to leave. So obviously those are the key metrics. If you have other site tracking or other things, absolutely leverage that as well.
And I found, and purchases, while imperfect, actually, maybe, if you think of MPP makes opens imperfect, maybe it's sort of similar, that purchase traffic tracking can be a little imperfect, but it's also another better than nothing. You can end up, somebody could come through and buy with a typoed email address, hopefully use email verification, buy from me, to help minimize that. But stuff can still happen. And so while purchases, while being an imperfect track, when you lose other types of tracking, like we have now with this age of MPP and bots and clicking and a whole bunch of other stuff, purchase is kind of a good backup. It's kind of a good backup metric to help identify people closest to the center of the thing. Again, it's not always perfect, and some people have real strong opinions about that. But in a lot of cases, it's better than nothing. Even this is not new to me either. This is going all the way back to, like I said, to my e-commerce days. It was definitely an area where, from a deliverability perspective, that tended to be one of the safer orbits for mailing segments was purchasers, for example.
Yeah. Then after you run your test, again, I would suggest at least 6 months or longer. I know it's the level of effort that drives it. So again, your mileage may vary, but I do think this is kind of something fundamental to email, especially, now if you're sending once a week, that's probably pretty restrained depending on the industry. So a lot of retailers, they're sending multiple times a day. And that's certainly where, that can be a factor for some people to just exit that list. So how long you run this test and what you want to prove, it depends on your capacity, but that's something you guys can judge. But, after it's over, okay, did John's premise pan out? Did different population respond differently? And again, you're looking for obviously purchases, and you're looking for people offboarding themselves. If, hey, this frequency, we had a higher unsubscribe rate, and that mostly impacted, are people most prone to purchase and recent purchasers and active purchasers. That to me, and you can kind of do the math on all right, well, if we had kept them around another 1 or 2 years, might we have been able to sell more to them. So I think that's kind of what we want to look at. Deliverability people, if we get deliverability problems and we get deliverability questions, but at the end of the day, we know you're not optimizing for deliverability. I've never heard anybody, a client separate their, year-end Q4, hey, we did it, we got 99.99% deliverability, everybody gets a bonus, right? So you're probably doing something, some of you might be charitable organizations or sending transactional mail that's high value, but at the end of the day, a lot of the mail is going to be marketing. So, all right, let's just be honest, let's do the math. But does that short-term gain, does that balance out for what then dropping users off quickly? So how do we optimize over the longevity, retain those people? And maybe the results were weird. Maybe you're 1 or 2 months into it and you're like, shoot, we shouldn't have used these populations. This was dumb. Like, I have a better idea. So it's always best to fail early. That you just be honest about what your goals are. You're trying to optimize the value you can provide to your customers, and also them giving you their money in most cases. So just be forthright about it. Yeah, make changes. But I do think I keep hearing, and it's somewhat intuitive to my life experience, that you can really chase people off with that excessive frequency. And sometimes they could have been your best customer, and you're using the cheapest way to communicate with them to drive things. So just a little bit of let's measure it. And I do think another thing, again, deliverability people always are looking at the negative metrics and the problems, and marketers are always looking at the money. So anytime the money or opens or clicks go up, it's celebration time. Anytime that goes down, it's what did the ESP do, or what did you guys do in the deliverability, or are things wrong? Did Gmail make a new filter change or something? Look at all those metrics together, and we're trying to optimize for the long run. So that's my thoughts there.
Excellent.
So I'll go back. This is the first slide we saw. This is kind of the regular flavor of lifecycle management. So we don't need to but I just want to reset with that. Then again, new VP edition. So we have okay, let's practice restraint, and then let's bombs away, which also is not ideal. It's probably worse than any other one for most cases. Now, here's one where it's like, okay, my group A, whatever they are, whether they're purchaser, regular purchasers or semi-engaged, people that don't read, maybe the people that don't read that much mail just aren't looking at their mailbox very often. So they might not care if you send 4 times a day. They only check it, every Tuesday morning. So maybe sending a lot is fine. You got to catch them when they put their butt in the seat. But whatever group A is, we said, hey, we can send that at high frequency. But it looks like A and B, we're kind of switching off. Okay, we shouldn't send to them every single time we're sending, but maybe. And then on occasions, we're throwing in all of them together. If we're keeping all these in the mix, we're keeping them active. They're not going to go invalid. You're not going to see a crazy high complaint rate as if you would have shelved them and come back to them. And again, is the distance between each of these mailings 4 hours, or is it a week? All that could depend, but now you're optimizing, you're sliding in that extra populations groups when it matters and when it's going to be beneficial, and you're holding them out so as not to annoy them in other cases. And here's one that I've thrown to some, I've worked with a number of clients, and it's sometimes it's like, I don't want to say goodbye, and again, if you're going to do that, so now I have groups A, B, and C, and these are our groups that are, okay, these guys are primed, they have tolerance to accept a good amount of mail. Group A accepts the most mail, B and C are a little bit standoffish, but I've thrown in the groups 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, maybe these guys are really inactive, and maybe they've not opened in 1 year, 2 years, something. Well, I wouldn't throw them in and annoy them with every campaign. And certainly people can have a different view on this. But if you want to keep them in a mix, I throw them in every fifth campaign, maybe every whatever. So you're putting 20% of that less active group in to keep them alive, to keep them, give them another chance to bite at the apple and say, hey, I'm still interested. So at least, when Gmail and Hotmail, they want to see the overall value you are giving to their users. Again, Gmail, if people are unsubscribing or leaving Gmail because they get too much mail, it's not what Gmail wants. Gmail wants people to be reading mail that is of value to them. And that's what they're trying to dictate. And, obviously the rest of the ISPs are mailbox providers as well. So, if you keep leaving that chunk of 20% or 40% or whatever it is and sending all that every time, then they're judging that amount. And again, after a certain amount of accumulation, it's kind of like, this is kind of starting to provide a negative value to the overall recipient base. And that's when it starts going to the spam folder. So consider this as a middle ground from chopping it off. If you just can't say goodbye, then at least reduce the ratio of that lesser engaged group. So I don't know if I've suggested that a lot. Again, I don't know if anybody's employed it because it's sort of hard to pick when that cadence would be and what messages are relevant, but I think it's valid.
Definitely. It is a strategy that I've definitely used with clients back in my exact target days. So you're not off base there. I've actually remember I could tell you, I could even name the guy Nate that I used to work with in services, who was the first one to propose that as a strategy to reduce the timing of the unengaged segment. So not to retire them completely, but to bust them out periodically so that they're getting sort of tickled less often, and had the numbers to show that it works. So there really is something to that.
And that was Nate.
Nate, yeah, I don't know if you ever met Nate Romance from Exact Target or Salesforce back in the day. He worked for me as a deliverability person for about 12 seconds and then went on to bigger and better things.
Oh, nothing personal, I'm sure. All right, I'll jump into this one. So other caveats, but I think pre-existing deliverability issues. Again, are you already at a high risk? Do you already have deliverability problems? I think, my premise is, hey, understand the tolerance of your audience before it results in Gmail bulk filtering you, Yahoo blocking you, Hotmail doing whatever it's going to do. You're trying to optimize your relationship with these recipient groups. So hopefully we're kind of getting ahead of where it becomes a deliverability problem, and we're optimizing for, again, that ongoing life cycle, that lifetime value. But if you already have deliverability issues, then I think any test run while there's currently deliverability issues is a muddled test. So understand pardon me, understand your risk profile and understand if you currently have any issues. By the way, it's a classic question to new clients. We do ask, hey, do you have any known deliverability, do you have any history of deliverability issues? And the answer is no. And sometimes when we're talking with them, we'll follow up with, how are you measuring it? It's like, I don't know, just we don't have any problems. Next question. So if you're not measuring it, whether that's through our hosts, services or your ESPs, if you're not monitoring it, then you can't really speak to whether you do have problems or not. So check out that risk, talk to your local deliverability guy or the folks at Kickbox. Lifecycle product, I think, obviously the nature of your product is going to dictate how much frequency is kind of sensible. The value of contents, we got into that, that's a whole different ball of wax, but we can't, Al and I aren't able to model out different content tests that you should do. There's the classic A/B test. But again, sometimes I say it's not always, hey, buy my stuff, buy my stuff. Sometimes it's good to have, especially if it's a niche hobby or something, give them back some value. Hey, have you tried these? You love our hiking boots. Have you tried these trails? And here's the top 10, whatever. Something that's not just buy my stuff today, I think is valued. Again, depends on the relationship you have with your customers and the type of the product. Audience size, yeah, if you have a very small audience, and kind of got into that, and then how much value, how impactful is the test, and again, did we run the test right? It's okay to have assumptions, kind of figure out, oh shoot, we did it wrong, and maybe maybe you can't do it every second, but maybe next year or something.
Excellent. So what about bots? And bots comes up a lot, starting from both, people sort of will call things bots that are not necessarily bots. It doesn't always mean that there's a bad guy out there with 30,000 infected servers trying to blow up your stats. There's a whole bunch of other stuff it could be, for example, right?
Yeah, and I think bots are, well, usually when I get here, it's we're having a bot attack. We saw a lot of opens or clicks, and we're under attack. And it's like, well, let's not use the word attack. A bot is an automation, so let's understand what it's doing there. Again, it's often kicked off by anti-spam devices, so it's kind of the good guys trying to stop the bad guys. There's other automations just for the ease of users. Apple has done its MPP to intentionally obfuscate whether that user is opening. So sort of the intent behind it. And sometimes it can be a game of whack-a-mole when you're experiencing a new bot that's out there. But rule one, don't panic. Look at your data, work with your ESP. And again, the bot activity often presents as opens or clicks or other activity. It is by definition additional activity. So if you have a very, very, very successful campaign, don't give out the high fives quite yet. You might want to evaluate whether it's sensible. Did all those clicks happen in the first 2 minutes? And obviously work with your ESP to kind of see if you guys can get a sense of where it's coming from and how to get your arms around it.
Excellent. Well, there we go. Keeping in mind, we've talked a lot about this. Some addresses are just never going to engage, whether they're bad or they're people's backup mailboxes. So there's things to try, right? What you can test different content and test different cadences, but actually monitoring and denoting that if there's just nobody home forever for some of that stuff, that's a suggestion that it might be worth your while to just set it aside.
Yeah, and I do think an email address is not a human being, right? And I have this conversation a lot, but they bought something once a month from me the past 5 years or something, and they're and then we look at their email address and it's something like one of these, John@Jamil, none@donothave.com. And Al, to be honest, I forget if we talked about this, but there was very recently in the news. I don't know if I'm stealing your story, but talk over me. But the United States military had a typo, would often typo their domain, and they were sending something to the government or military of Mali. And that was just recently, discovered. There was all sorts of sensitive personal information in there. So I often get asked, is it a bad domain? Is it a bad address? Is it? Well, it's valid. It was purchased. It is receiving mail. It is, so determining what a bad domain is can be fairly tricky. So, my guidance to manage this is, one, you can use a list cleanse or other list cleanse tool monitoring tools. So the folks at Kickbox can probably help you out with that. Or just look at, I look at, there's a difference between, hey, has this user ever opened or clicked versus has this user opened or clicked in the past 9 months or last year. If they've never opened or clicked, I think at some point, again, run it through a list cleanse or have somebody manually review it, whatever you want to do. But, I bet that at least half the people listening on this call certainly have typo domains if you're not manicuring your data or doing, a lot of confirmed opt-in and double, all kinds of things. You're going to see some other emails. By the way, John@Yotmail. Yotmail is a temporary domain, temporary email address. So it's likely if you send out 15% coupons, people want to receive that first email, they harvest the coupon and use it, and then they never check it again. Now, maybe that's fine enough for you. If somebody pays, they gave you 85% of the value. If that's good with you, that's fine. But just be mindful that I don't think any deliverability person likes you to accumulate lots of addresses and domains run by some third party on the internet. It's just not a great practice. So I would definitely keep an eye on that stuff. Again, email address is not a person. The person is sometimes purchasing through their account that's cash in the computer, but it's not the email address. So think about that. I've absolutely seen that impact mail streams when it wasn't a good time. So
typos are scary things. marketers are shielded from the worst of it sometimes, and that the government of Mali thing is a perfect example of that. I run a spam trap network myself. I've got a couple hundred domains. It's tiny compared to what some of the big guys like Spam House do and run. But if I wanted to, I don't know, hack Facebook accounts, I don't even have to try. I just have to sit and watch the password reset emails come into my spam trap network. People fill out garbage on forms all the time. They get their own email addresses wrong at a crazy level. Now, the deliverability impact is one of those potential impacts, and we're kind of lucky here in marketing land. Then that's basically our only impact. If you think about anybody, any service software provider, and anything where you're registering with an account that has value or has money attached or has identification attached, to not verify or validate or do anything to denote a good address versus a bad address means you are shoveling PII out the door to the wrong person. That Mali thing being a perfect example of that. If the government of Mali, thankfully, they tend to be an ally of ours, doesn't mean they're probably not. They may still have some interest in stuff they can learn from looking at email messages that they aren't supposed to see. And our government is just accidentally shoveling them emails full of stuff that they shouldn't be sharing outside of government. That's a prime example of what goes wrong with typo domains and spam traps. And it's sort of amazing that had to get into the news before somebody noticed it. Thankfully, somebody did, and I'm sure that government systems will just do some sort of hackneyed block against that whole Mali TLD or something silly instead of getting to the root of the problem and better verifying what's actually going into address books and lists used by the government. But again, that's sort of the other side of that same typo and bad domain coin. It's really icky stuff.
There was one quote from one of the people from the U.S. military that said, "We're going to train, our blah blah blah," and I would prefer a software driven change rather than tell every private that's coming in, "Hey, here's how to type army.mil every time," and not typo it. I think they need to kind of have it be whatever they need to do, but they need to close that up. And I don't think just reminding people, typically the end user isn't always the best way to moderate things, especially when it becomes things that are so sensitive. So
Yeah.
maybe they'll have us consult. Maybe somebody's watching us right now.
Yes, I'm available for hire. Well, we're happy to fix your problem. Unless the government of Mali wants to feed us that spam trap, would probably be handy for deliverability tracking. That can go back. That would go wrong horribly. Speaking of things that'll go wrong for you horribly, respect bounces. And this is why you need to respect bounces. ISPs retire addresses. Specifically, Google just started retiring inactive accounts. Now, the focus here is on any type of Google activity. So it's not just Gmail, but it effectively means Gmail. Gmail addresses are going to go dead. They're going to start bouncing. They're going to get shut down permanently when there's more than 2 years of inactivity. What comes then has not been disclosed. They could just be shut down and they'll bounce forever. Maybe they'll reopen those usernames to new people in the future, meaning you could end up mailing the wrong person than you intended if you just keep mailing and never suppressing addresses that bounce. Or maybe they turn them into spam traps and feed that into some engine that says, if you're emailing enough totally bad addresses like this, we're just going to block your mail outright, and it could cause you more deliverability doom and gloom. So like I said, Gmail just started doing this. Google just started doing this. Comcast does it as well. Yahoo does it too. Others do it as well. So this is a whole part of, this is another signal that tells you that addresses are dead. So when they're bouncing because there's nobody home, there's a reason for that. And it's the thing that is a huge bummer is sometimes bounces happen by accident, but that is pretty much the exception rather than the rule. And a lot of systems will have sort of counter-based measures in place to handle bounces or handle user unknown differently than a spam block bounce or things like that. But at the end of the day, if addresses are bouncing over and over and over, it's going to be in your best interest, deliverability-wise, to not keep mailing them forever. What else? The last drum beat I wanted to sort of bang here is kind of a silly one. Like, let's talk basics for 2 seconds. Had somebody on a prior webinar I did who sort of was carping that the content was a little too basic, but let me tell you, friend, when people come to us for deliverability consult and I check the headers and want to help them, and the first thing I see is there's no DKIM signature or a broken DKIM signature or an SPF failure because a company added IPs to new servers and didn't update their SPF record, or they've implemented DMARC incorrectly. That happens a lot. So though there's certainly, we talked a lot about deeper strategy, especially for engagement and lifecycle management, there is a whole bunch of deeper strategy to have there, and I'm glad we have a chance to have these deeper level discussions. But don't forget about the basics. The basics are easy to mess up. People do mess them up. There's a little bit of nuance here in that, for example, DKIM authentication. Does it guarantee inbox placement? No, it does not. But if you don't have it, is it going to make it harder for you to get to the inbox? Yes, it will. So think that specific thing through, right? Again, it's not a guarantee of inbox placement, but if you don't have your authentication ducks in a row, you're going to struggle. And like John said earlier, when you're trying to figure out what strategy to apply to maximize your email ROI, you've got to get the basic stuff right first. You've got to get the deliverability problems, the technical problems out of the way before you can dive into strategy.
Yeah, deliverability is a practice of kind of trying to do everything right that you can and avoiding doing everything wrong that you can. And then hopefully that's enough to appease the internet.
Yeah. And so these links will be in the follow-up email, and you'll be able to get a copy of the slide deck too, so you don't have to sit here and write these down. But if you're looking for more information and want to learn more about deliverability, there's where you can find John's writings on the Epsilon blog. You can find me at Spam Resource. You can find myself and my very smart colleague, Jennifer Nespola Lance, at the Kickbox blog. And don't forget to talking about those basics and the sort of the table stakes for deliverability success. Gmail is the big dog in a lot of ways in the consumer email world. So learning about Gmail best practices is never a bad thing.
Yep.
Now we have time for Q&A. Brian, what do you think?
Right on. Well, it looks like we really don't have that much time left. We're close to the top of the hour, but we don't have a ton of questions either. So I'll just go ahead and throw the one out here. Can you speak more about how to how to see fake opens from Apple MPP, like, and with that, are there any someone's asking if there's anything that the sending platforms, the email service provider will do to kind of help identify that, like pools of IPs or something like that.
John, you were saying that Epsilon buckets MPPs specifically uniquely, right?
Yeah, so and we're doing it on user agent. So Apple does give other people, others may use the same user agent, but it's a very generic one, and one kind of it stands out from any other user agents. Thankfully, unfortunately, I've had to look at user agents a lot over the past 3 years, thanks to Apple. So we do it based on that user agent. I've heard others talk about, getting down to the connecting IP level. That does get you into a game of theoretically continuously updating the IPs and kind of playing a whack-a-mole game with Apple. Apple is a very capable company, and they are trying to obfuscate if their users are opening or clicking, which makes our lives harder, but trying to stay ahead of a very capable, dedicated company that is dedicated to privacy is going to be kind of an ongoing race. So we mostly key off of that user agent. And I think, again, any system needs to kind of have a little bit of flexibility to know, hey, this isn't 100% done perfect. This is Schrodinger's opens, and you should treat those as differentially. They're not inactives. They're maybe actives in some cases, and don't make any kind of finalized decisions based just on that. You have to kind of look at the whole, user activity and all that kind of thing. So it does get complicated, but I think anybody on this should speak with their ESPs and say, hey, what is your methodology? Just so that you have their, kind of confidence level of what an MPP is and how they've categorized it.
And I don't find user agent to be untrustworthy in that instance. It's a very, Apple uses, like you said, a very generic user agent, but it also happens to not show up very much elsewhere.
Right.
So it's one of those, I feel 99+% confident that that user agent is going to be your Apple opens. There'll be some weird edge case stuff, some random weirdo on a Linux box who might trigger that super generic open or user agent as well. But like I said, for the most part, understanding that it's not always going to be perfect, but having some flexibility to see what can you do to track it. Apple publishes lists of their proxy IPs. The open question there, though, is are those going to also be, is there other traffic coming through those IPs? Could some of those clicks and opens be legitimate or otherwise be some other client, for example, but still on iOS, clicking through and it comes up in Safari, and then Safari's got private mode or obfuscation of IP address turned on. That gets confusing. I don't know if I necessarily want to just assume that that's all MPP related traffic. I don't know what the right answer is there, but in the meantime, like you, I've always looked at user agent, and to me, that seems more than good enough.
Great. Well, I appreciate y'all answering that. Let's see, you've got another one here about sunset. Yeah. Definitely look at the life cycle part of this presentation. We'll be sending all this information soon. So if you missed anything, we will, you'll definitely have another chance to go back and review this. It's been great, right? Well, let's go through the contact real quick. Definitely, if you have any more questions, reach out to us, right? help@kickbox.com. If you want to hear more about our partners, Epsilon, collaborate at epsilon.com. Keep an eye out for an email from us with not only the recording, but the resources that were mentioned here also. So this was great, guys. Like I know, Al, you said that we covered a lot of basics. It's about the basics, but I always learn a lot, even just from helping host these webinars, especially with this one about the life cycle management and the different options you have there, not just, okay, they're not engaged, throw them away. So I think that's a great example of, how to balance the priorities of deliverability and also the business needs. Really appreciate y'all, everyone for joining, and, thank you, John and Al, for sharing your expertise. We really appreciate it. So, I'll go ahead and wrap it up here, but yeah, everyone, be on the lookout in your inbox. We'll send the recording and resources soon. And yeah, if you need to talk to us, just reply to that email or contact us here. But we'll go ahead and wrap it up, and have a great day, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Hey.